My fiancée invited my abusive twin to my wedding without my knowledge. I had been engaged to my girlfriend of 3 years for a few months when we were supposed to get married 2 days ago. My girlfriend was a normal and pretty laid-back person before we got engaged. Prior to our engagement, the woman in question was a relatively normal and agreeable individual. However, as soon as she received the engagement ring, she underwent a significant personality shift, becoming controlling and stubborn. She was unwilling to consider my opinions or suggestions regarding the wedding planning process. Instead, she proceeded to plan the entire wedding without taking any of my input into account. She invited a number of individuals to the wedding, including some of my long-standing acquaintances who had not spoken to me in years. I informed her on several occasions that it would be unwise to invite these individuals, as it would likely cause discomfort for all involved. However, she was adamant about including them in the wedding. It was necessary to be invited. Eventually, I ceased attempting to influence her behavior and simply hoped that her newfound independence would dissipate once we were married. She had always exhibited control issues, even before I met her. My friend, who was the one who introduced me to her, informed me of this. However, I had not anticipated the extent of her control issues. She required to be the one in charge at all times, and everything she said had to be carried out, or else she would become distressed. I managed to cope with this for the few weeks leading up to the wedding without expressing my concerns, as I did love her. However, she committed an act that was wholly unforgivable while we were compiling a list of individuals to invite a few months ago. My fiancée had inquired about my sister, and I was somewhat taken aback because I had explicitly informed her several months into our relationship that I had ceased all communication with my sister 10 years ago and had not heard from her since. This is the manner in which I prefer to maintain our relationship. She had encountered my family 6 months into our relationship. Upon observing the numerous family photographs adorning the walls, she inquired about the identity of the strikingly similar girl who appeared in all of my childhood photographs. I had to explain that to inform her of my estranged sister, my twin sister and I went into a period of non-communication, NC, 10 years ago following an incident that significantly altered my life trajectory. While we were not particularly close during our formative years, it is possible that the images of us as happy children constantly hugging and smiling may give the impression that we were close. Although we appeared to be close to our parents, we were actually constantly at odds with each other. Our relationship was not based on love, rather, it was one of mutual dislike. We engaged in a constant competition to outdo each other, which persisted until our high school years. I outperformed her on a standardized test, which caused her to become enraged and refuse to interact with me for days. I viewed this as a victory and felt that I had surpassed her. I was unaware that the most challenging period was yet to come. A few weeks later, it was time to learn which colleges we had been accepted into. Both my sister and I were straight-A students, so we anticipated being accepted into all the colleges that we had applied to. My first choice was Yale. My sister's college choice was Princeton, and I had not even considered applying to Princeton because I believed that if she had been accepted, I would not have wanted to attend the same institution. However, my friends convinced me to apply at the last minute, as I could not base decisions about my future on such trivial matters. The issue of whether my sister would be attending the same institution was a relatively trivial matter. It was time to cease this futile rivalry. I had made a significant fuss about not applying to Princeton and had even brought it up at dinner. When I changed my mind and did apply, upon reconsidering my initial decision, I refrained from discussing it further, as it would have been highly embarrassing to retract my previous commitment after having made such a public display of it. Moreover, even my sister had indicated that she had not applied to Yale for similar reasons, likely as a form of retaliation. However, I do not believe that she was sincere in her decision. It is possible that she would have reneged on her commitment eventually. Eventually, I was accepted into both institutions. While my sister was accepted into Columbia, she was not accepted into Princeton. This was a significant disappointment for her, as she had been fixated on attending Princeton since her senior year. As the academic year commenced, I could discern that the situation was likely to deteriorate further once my sister learned of my acceptance to Princeton. As it transpired, I had been correct in my assumption. I had planned to withhold the news of my acceptance from Princeton, as I had no intention of attending. Furthermore, I was not concerned about causing my sister distress. I was concerned about offending her, but I simply wished to avoid any additional stress before my departure for college. However, it appears that my parents had already learned of my decision, as they likely reviewed our mail. My mother then organized a surprise party for us that afternoon, during which she revealed the names of all the colleges to which I had applied. The inscription was written in frosting on our cakes. I was unaware of this development. Had I been informed, I would have taken action to prevent it. Upon seeing Princeton on my cake, my sister scoffed and asserted that I had not applied. However, I believe she may have discerned the truth from my facial expression. She began screaming in my face, claiming that I had ruined her life and stolen her future. I attempted to explain that I was unaware that she would not be accepted and that I did not intend to cause her distress. However, given our history of competition and rivalry, it was challenging to convince her of my sincerity. Despite my genuine remorse, she eventually lost interest and departed in a huff, sobbing. I remained in the living room while my parents expressed their exasperation with our incessant quarreling and urged us to reflect on the necessity for personal growth. I could not disagree with them, as they had attempted to reconcile our differences, but our mutual antipathy seemed to be a lifelong condition. Consequently, they had given up trying to influence our behavior and had simply allowed us to pursue our own paths. I decided to heed my parents' counsel, and it was my hope that my sister and I could at least be civil to each other. 15 minutes after she left, I went out to speak to her. Most of our guests had already left after my sister's outburst, and it was quite dark outside. I couldn't see my sister out there, so I tried to call out her name. However, before I could do so, I was aware of the situation. I felt a substantial impact to the back of my head, and I collapsed to the ground. I recall experiencing excruciating pain and screaming for assistance before losing consciousness. I subsequently awoke in a hospital room with my wrist in a. Once I had regained consciousness, my parents informed me that my sister had been waiting outside for me to emerge from the house. When I called out her name, she struck me in the head with a shovel and then proceeded to step on my left wrist with considerable force. This is the reason for the injury. I was dislocated. I was incredulous at the gravity of the situation. While I had my fair share of differences with my sister, I could not fathom doing something so psychotic and depraved to her, not just to her, but to anyone. My parents had implored me not to press charges. Given the circumstances, I had no choice but to let the matter rest. However, I subsequently lost contact with my sister and never inquired about her whereabouts. I was unaware of her subsequent educational institution or where she had relocated after the incident. My parents had sent her away, and I was not informed of her destination. I was aware that they continued to maintain contact with her, as they frequently traveled on weekends. They did not disclose the identities of their visitors, but I was aware that they were visiting my sister. I did not hold any ill will towards them, as I understood that this was their best option for maintaining our separation. After I had recovered and been deemed fit by the doctors, I started college. However, since I had missed a few weeks already, I was way behind in my grades that semester. In addition, I experienced frequent migraines due to the head injury, which further complicated my academic performance. The lump at the back of my head served as a constant reminder of the abuse I had endured at the hands of my own sister. This incident, along with other traumatic experiences, contributed to my emotional distress during that period. I sought therapy to help me cope with these challenges and regain my sense of well-being. It has been a decade since that time, and I have since made significant progress in my life. Furthermore, I have never discussed my sister with anyone, including my family. I believe they have maintained contact with her, but they have the good sense to refrain from mentioning her in my presence. When my fiancée inquired about her, I informed her that we were not inviting her, assuming that this would be the end of the discussion. I had never informed her of the circumstances surrounding the incident, but I do not believe that I am required to do so. The simple fact that we have not spoken for over a decade should be sufficient for her to understand that I am adamantly opposed to my sister's presence. Now and not ever again, she should have respected that, but she began to hound me and did not cease for days until I snapped at her and informed her that if she brought my sister up again, I would cancel the entire wedding. This seemed to have the desired effect of silencing her for a while, but then, 2 days ago, on the day of our wedding, I became aware of the fact that my sister had been involved in a clandestine activity on the day of the wedding. I was standing in front of the minister, awaiting my fiancé's arrival at the altar. The music began to play, and the bridesmaid began to walk down the aisle. At that moment, I noticed my sister walking arm in arm with one of my friends. She was accompanied by one of my friends, who appeared as perplexed as I felt. Even my sister seemed bewildered. I was rendered mute for a few seconds, and I was utterly at a loss as to what was occurring. My fiancée finally walked down the aisle, appearing jubilant and smiling broadly. However, I did not experience any emotions other than anger and betrayal. I was aware that this was her doing and could not believe that she had even resorted to such a thing, particularly on our wedding day. I felt completely blindsided, and as a result, I did not experience any emotional distress. Many of my guests could understand why I had an unpleasant expression on my face while my bride was walking down the aisle. She approached me when she was finally standing across from me, still sporting that smile. I did not hesitate and immediately inquired as to why my sister was present. I had explicitly instructed her not to invite her under any circumstances. She informed me that she was unwilling to engage in that discussion and wanted to proceed with the wedding first. It was evident that this was no longer a viable option. I therefore informed her that we needed to discuss the matter immediately. She then admitted that she had informed my parents that I had expressed a desire to reconcile with my sister before getting married. This was how she had managed to persuade them to provide her with my sister's address. Contact information. She informed me that she had exerted considerable effort to persuade them, with the intention of surprising me. She even presumed to suggest that it was time for us to reconcile with our past, despite her lack of knowledge regarding the events that transpired 10 years ago. We were engaged in a heated exchange at the time. I remained silent for approximately 5 minutes, during which our guests waited. Finally, I realized that there was no point in continuing to fight for our relationship. I was done with her and did not wish to have anything further to do with her. I simply walked out of the wedding. I could hear her calling for me to return, but I did not respond. I continued walking until I reached my vehicle, then I started driving and kept driving until sunset. I was unable to find any suitable hotels in the vicinity, so I decided to sleep in my car. I cancelled all calls and messages on my phone in the evening and deliberately ignored all calls and messages from my fiancé and family members. Fortunately, I had sufficient fuel to return home the following day. However, upon seeing my fiancé's vehicle in the driveway, I decided to stay at a hotel instead. It has been 2 days since I last responded to any of my fiancé's calls or texts. My parents have also been trying to contact me, but I am unable to respond at this time. I had sufficient fuel to return home the following day, but upon seeing my fiancé's vehicle in the driveway, I opted to reside at a hotel instead. It has been 2 days since I have responded to any of my fiancé's calls or texts. My parents have also attempted to contact me, but I have been unable to respond to them at this time. In all honesty, it is difficult to comprehend how they could have been so naive as to believe that I would suggest a reconciliation with my sister, and that I would be pleased by my fiancé's deception. It is reasonable to assume that they would have been more forthcoming had they called me to confirm whether this was the kind of surprise I would have wanted at my wedding. I am extremely displeased with my fiancée for her actions. She had no right to go behind my back, manipulate my parents, and then bring my sister, whom I had been in no contact with for 10 years, to our wedding. She created a significant disruption, none of which would have occurred if she had simply respected my wishes. A few hours ago, she sent me a lengthy text in which she expressed regret for her actions and apologized for blindsiding me. She acknowledged that she should have listened to my wishes regarding my sister's attendance at the wedding. Furthermore, she indicated that my parents and friends were displeased with her actions and that she had received a strong reprimand from them. However, she also suggested that I should have disclosed the specifics of my conflict with my sister and the precise reason for it. I ceased communication with her to prevent her from extending an invitation to her sister. While I recognize the potential benefits of this approach, I believe it is not my responsibility to provide a detailed account of my past experiences. This is a painful subject for me, and I am not inclined to discuss it further. Additionally, I believe she should have simply accepted my initial statements without further inquiry. I did not want my sister to have any contact with me. It is implausible that a sister would sever ties with her sibling for a decade without a compelling reason. She should have been aware that I was experiencing a difficult period and that I might have disclosed the circumstances at a later point in time. However, I did not feel it was necessary to do so immediately. I am not engaged to be married. I am not inclined to extend any further hospitality to her. I am uncertain as to whether I am obliged to offer an apology. I do not feel particularly remorseful about the situation, and if anything, she should be the one offering an apology without placing the blame on me. What are your thoughts on this matter? I have not informed my fiancée of the reasons behind my estrangement from my sister over the years. I have been residing in the hotel for 3 days. I posed my question yesterday, and I was correct in my assessment that an apology was unwarranted. Consequently, I have resumed my policy of ignoring her. I did, however, speak with my mother this morning. Our conversation was somewhat strained and awkward. She expressed her profound regret for the incident and acknowledged that she should have been more cognizant of my wishes. My sister was never to be permitted to enter my life again. My fiancé had contacted them a few weeks prior and had been attempting to persuade them for several weeks before they agreed to provide my sister's contact information. My fiancé had also forced them to promise that they would not discuss the matter with me. Since she desired for it to be a surprise, and in retrospect, they do believe that it was an ill-advised decision on their part, I am gratified that they have recognized this and apologized for it. However, I am uncertain if I am prepared to forgive them, as I am currently experiencing a range of conflicting emotions. Nevertheless, I anticipate that I will eventually forgive them. I am currently undecided as to whether I will forgive them. I am planning to return home in a few days, but I must ensure that my fiancée is not present upon my return. She will be the one to vacate the residence, as it is, in fact, my own. I will allow her a sufficient period of time to pack and move out, which is more than she deserves in light of the circumstances. The relationship has definitively concluded, and I am gratified by this outcome. I informed my fiancée a few days ago that she was required to vacate the residence with immediate effect and granted her a 5-day period to do so. It is now the 6th day, and I have returned to my own residence, anticipating her departure, given that she had responded to my message indicating her intention to do so. I had expected her to have vacated the premises by today, so I returned to my own residence. To my surprise, I discovered her in the living room. She had likely relocated her vehicle to another location, creating the impression that she was no longer present. I was deceived. I was displeased to see her there and informed her that I was disinclined to engage in further discussion at that time. My fiancé was, in fact, entirely unresponsive to my statements and proceeded to expound at length on her distress over the preceding days and her expectation that I should have informed her of my whereabouts. I am uncertain why, but for some reason, my fiancé had assumed that, despite the circumstances, we could simply resume our relationship and continue from where we had left off, as if she had paused a game. When I did not respond, she continued to speak, stating that it was my responsibility to inform her of the situation. She then proceeded to accuse me of withholding information from her that could have potentially placed her in a compromising situation, given that she had recently visited my sister. At this juncture, I reached my limit. I was incredulous that she would even attempt to shift the blame onto me, so I informed her, in a rather blunt manner, that she should leave my house immediately. Immediately, she appeared somewhat disconcerted. It seemed that she had not anticipated this turn of events. She attempted to engage in a debate but was unsuccessful. I informed her that she needed to leave immediately. I was unable to tolerate her presence and her voice was particularly distressing. I was at my limit and wanted her to leave permanently. I believe I made a significant impact because she immediately began to cry. However, I was so emotionally drained that I did not engage further. I proceeded to console her, after which I left her to her tears while I retired to my bedroom and locked myself in to take a nap. When I awoke, it was dark outside, and my fiancée was gone. I surmise that she will return at a later time to retrieve her belongings, but for the time being, I am finally on my own. I have been afforded some space to reflect and process the events of this past week. Update 3. It has been 3 days since my fiancée departed, yet she has been unable to accept the dissolution of our relationship. She has been calling me daily, but I have not been answering her calls. I do, however, feel some degree of sympathy for her, particularly in light of the circumstances surrounding my parents. On the previous day, my parents paid me a visit and expressed their profound regret for the unfortunate incident that had transpired. They also took full responsibility for their actions. I also inquired about my sister's whereabouts over the years. They informed me that after the incident, they had sent her to an anger management rehabilitation center for several months. She underwent intensive therapy and treatment for her mental health issues, which were considerably more severe than mine. Once she was cleared, she resumed her studies at college. However, she opted to rent an apartment and live independently. My parents would visit her on weekends. She appeared to be much more stable and normal after that. Furthermore, she had been employed at the same company for approximately 7 years. She had been residing in a nearby town and had operated her own business, which was a positive aspect of her life. Additionally, I was informed that after I abruptly terminated my participation in the wedding ceremony, my sister appeared to recognize that she had been the cause of the situation and promptly departed, offering an apology to our parents for their presence at the ceremony. It would appear that my fiancé had informed my sister that this was merely a rehearsal and not the actual wedding. However, this did not seem to be the case to her, which is why she appeared confused. My parents also handed me a letter that my sister had written to me. After they left, I finally opened it and read it. It has been an hour since then, and she expressed remorse for her actions during our childhood and adolescence, acknowledging that her behavior had caused significant distress. She conveyed a sense of regret for the deterioration of our relationship and suggested that it might be irreparable. She stated that she did not anticipate reconciliation in the near future due to regarding her violent tendencies. She expressed a desire for my forgiveness and a genuine opportunity to become the kind of siblings that others would desire. I was moved by this sentiment and recognized the potential for a positive outcome. I will allow myself time to consider this possibility and, if I am ready, I will forgive her. I have been somewhat unkind in the past, so I am willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. I would also like to address the issue of her conduct towards me as a child. At this point, my primary objective is to rebuild my life and focus on improving my mental state. The past few months have been particularly challenging for me. I am currently awaiting the return of my fiancée to retrieve her belongings so that I can block her and move on with my life. I believe that I have endured sufficient drama for an entire lifetime, and I am now ready to move on.